In the following short video, I discuss our industrialized way of life. The way of life that we who are living today, especially those of us who are living in the industrialized West, consider normal. To the extent that we think about it at all, most of us believe, without question, that our industrialized way of life will continue as is for the indefinite future. Nothing could be further from the truth. During the next few minutes, I will address 4 questions pertaining to our industrialized way of life. How is it enabled? Why is it self-terminating? Why is it unraveling now? And what happens next? Earth resources are the fundamental enablers. They enable all life on Earth, including human life. An Earth resource is a component of Earth's ecosystem that exists as a consequence of one or more naturally occurring biogeochemical processes. Earth resources, which are classified as renewable natural resources and non-renewable natural resources, are free from human processing and alteration. Renewable natural resources, which consist of air, water, soil, and naturally occurring plants and animals, replenish over time. RNRs enable basic subsistence for all life forms on Earth. Non-renewable natural resources, which consist of fossil fuels, metals, and non-metallic minerals, do not replenish on a timescale that is relevant from the perspective of human time, in the event that they replenish at all. NNRs enable our industrialized way of life. Approximately 90 of Earth's geological materials are of sufficient industrial value to be considered NNRs. 3 are fossil fuels, 48 are metals, and the rest are non-metallic minerals. NNRs serve as the primary inputs to our industrialized economies. They are the building blocks that comprise our infrastructure, machines, and products, and they are the primary energy sources that power our industrialized societies. Since the inception of our Industrial Revolution in the mid-18th century, NNRs have enabled extraordinary increases in prosperity for increasingly large segments of Earth's ever-expanding human population. All living species on Earth, including Homo sapiens, are governed by a common, nature-imposed law: natural resource net depletion, which is simply drawing down a natural resource reserve at a rate that exceeds its replenishment rate, is unsustainable, period. No exceptions. Given that NNRs do not replenish, it follows that any and all NNR depletion, especially NNR depletion on an industrial scale, is unsustainable, period. No exceptions. Nature's law implies quite a predicament for NNR-dependent industrial humanity. William Catton, in his seminal classic, Overshoot, The Ecological Basis of Revolutionary Change, expressed our predicament as follows. Organisms using their habitat unavoidably reduce its capacity to support their kind by what they necessarily do to it in the process of living. To paraphrase Catton from the perspective of industrial humanity, what we do to enable our existence simultaneously undermines our existence. Specifically, since the dawn of our industrial era, we, increasingly ingenious Homo sapiens, have been depleting, persistently and increasingly, the finite, non-replenishing, and increasingly scarce NNRs that enable our industrialized way of life, and our very existence. Because the Earth resource utilization behavior that enables our existence and that is essential to perpetuating our existence simultaneously undermines our existence, both our Earth resource utilization behavior and our resultant industrialized way of life are self-terminating. Again, what we do to enable our existence simultaneously undermines our existence. During the first 2 centuries of our industrial era, we Homo sapiens proved to be quite adept at increasing our prosperity. A uniquely favorable global natural environment, characterized by abundant high-quality, low-cost NNRs, enabled uniquely favorable human cultural environments, characterized by political, economic and societal circumstances that encouraged the development of unprecedented human ingenuity, through which we were able to successfully exploit our favorable natural environment. Throughout this period, our old normal, global NNR quality, generally increased as the largest, most accessible NNR deposits of the highest grade and purity were discovered. The cost associated with exploiting these high-quality NNRs, the low-hanging fruit, generally decreased over time. As NNR exploitation costs decreased, NNR prices decreased as well, which increased NNR affordability and stimulated NNR demand. New NNR uses and users emerged continuously within an environment of relative global NNR abundance. Not surprisingly, global NNR utilization accelerated during this period, as illustrated by the upward sloping, concave upward shape of the NNR depletion curve. Accelerating global NNR utilization enabled accelerating human prosperity. That is, accelerating economic growth and accelerating material living standard improvement, especially for populations residing in the industrializing West. This phenomenon is illustrated by the identically shaped human prosperity curve. Unfortunately, since the mid-20th century, the uniquely favorable natural environment and cultural environments that enabled our extraordinary industrial success have been deteriorating. During our new normal, global NNR quality has decreased, as Earth's high-quality NNR deposits have become extensively depleted, and NNR discoveries have been generally fewer, smaller, less accessible, and of lower grade and purity. Predictably, the costs associated with exploiting these lower quality NNRs, the high-hanging fruit, have been increasing. As NNR exploitation costs increased, NNR prices increased as well, which reduced NNR affordability and suppressed NNR demand, all within an environment of increasingly pervasive global NNR scarcity. Not surprisingly, global NNR utilization has decelerated during this period, as illustrated by the concave downward shape of the NNR depletion curve since the 1970s. Decelerating global NNR utilization has caused decelerating human prosperity, that is, decelerating economic growth and decelerating material living standard improvement, especially for populations residing in the industrialized West. This phenomenon is illustrated by the identically shaped human prosperity curve since the 1970s. In summary, during the past half-century, our old normal of geologically enabled abundance and accelerating human prosperity has been displaced by our new normal of geologically imposed scarcity and decelerating human prosperity. The result is the unraveling of our industrialized way of life. Over the course of our industrial era, we have come to believe that globally available economically viable NNR supplies will remain sufficient to address our ever-increasing requirements for the indefinite future. Perpetual NNR abundance has been presumed, without question. This fundamentally flawed belief, which has provided the impetus for our persistent and ever-increasing exploitation of NNRs during the past 250 years, has led to the deterioration of our once favorable global natural environment. The increasingly debilitating manifestation of this phenomenon is a relentless and remorseless squeeze, nature's squeeze, through which increasingly pervasive global NNR scarcity is causing faltering global human prosperity. Specifically, the ever-widening gap between our enormous and ever-increasing NNR requirements and globally available, economically viable NNR supplies is causing a comparable, ever-widening gap between our expected level of prosperity and our actual level of prosperity. Regrettably, globally available, economically viable NNR supplies are no longer sufficient to enable increasing global prosperity at rates to which we have become accustomed and to which we feel entitled. More regrettably, both the NNR gap and the prosperity gap will continue to widen in the future as nature's squeeze tightens. Most regrettably, our deteriorating natural environment is causing our deteriorating cultural environments, as evidenced by increasing global political instability, economic fragility, and societal unrest, and as illustrated by our faltering global prosperity. Since the mid-20th century, as increasingly pervasive global NNR scarcity has displaced relative global NNR abundance, our inflation-adjusted global GDP growth rate has plunged from a robust 5 to 6% annually during the 1960s and early 70s to just above 2% currently. So what are our options for the future? Because neither our NNR utilization behavior nor our NNR-enabled industrialized way of life is sustainable. Pursuing business as usual, perpetuating our industrialized way of life, is a physically impossible course of action. Alternatively, scaling back our NNR use through conservation, recycling, increased efficiency, enhanced productivity, growth reduction, population control, or similar courses of action would, at best, only slightly delay the inevitable. And unfortunately, a stay of execution is not the same as a pardon, and nature doesn't grant pardons. For Homo sapiens, as with all other species on Earth, sustainability is not optional. Humankind will be sustainable. Industrial humanity will transition to a non-industrialized way of life, in which an infinitesimal human population will subsist exclusively on renewable natural resources. At issue is whether we will transition voluntarily or involuntarily. Given our lack of awareness regarding our predicament and its implications, it's not surprising that we've already made our choice, by default. As a species that has been conditioned since the inception of our Industrial Revolution to expect our old reality of continuously more and more, we Homo sapiens will not accept gracefully our new reality of continuously less and less. We will not, therefore, seek to optimize our transition to post-industrial sustainability by voluntarily reducing our global population to a very small fraction of its current size and transitioning cooperatively to an NNR-free, RNR-enabled subsistence-level existence. Despite the fact that an orchestrated transition to sustainability is the least horrific of our available options, we will instead pull out all the stops in an increasingly desperate and futile attempt to perpetuate our industrial existence until nature's squeeze causes us to crack. Unfortunately, the inevitable consequence of our self-inflicted predicament is our self-inflicted demise. Within the context of our enormous and ever-increasing global NNR requirements, our persistent and ever-increasing depletion of Earth's finite and non-replenishing NNR reserves is causing decreasing NNR quality, which is causing increasing NNR exploitation costs, which are causing increasing NNR prices, which are causing diminishing NNR affordability, which is causing diminishing NNR utilization, which is causing diminishing infrastructure, machinery, product, and energy production, which is causing faltering global prosperity, which is causing accelerating political instability, economic fragility, and societal unrest, which will culminate in our self-inflicted global societal collapse. As global NNR scarcity becomes increasingly pervasive during the coming decades, we will resort increasingly to conflict as the means by which to allocate remaining NNRs and RNRs, initially through increasingly debilitating us versus them resource wars, and ultimately through a species-threatening war of all against all. Like a snowball rolling downhill, humanity's unraveling will gain momentum as negative feedback loops driven by increasingly frequent and severe local, regional, national, and global systemic failures exacerbate our deteriorating circumstances. As extensively depleted and irreparably damaged Earth resource reserves become permanently unproductive, industrialized nations, irrespective of their political ideologies, economic systems, and societal orientations, will collapse, taking the aid-dependent, non-industrialized nations with them. Global human prosperity will peak and enter terminal decline, a scenario that will quickly devolve into permanent global societal collapse, species collapse, almost certainly by the year 2050. Under the best-case post-collapse scenario, a few million Homo sapiens will eke out a subsistence-level existence by scavenging among the remnants of Earth's once abundant resources. Under the worst-case scenario, our species will become extinct through warfare, starvation, pestilence, and disease. It is certainly not the case that our incessant quest for universal prosperity through global industrialization and the unsustainable NNR utilization behavior that enables our quest are inherently evil. We Homo sapiens have simply behaved like any species that is introduced into a habitat in which it can succeed. We succeeded and thrived because we could. We applied our unparalleled ingenuity, our resourcefulness, technical innovation, efficiency improvements, and productivity enhancements over the past several centuries toward dramatically increasing our prosperity through our ever-increasing utilization of finite and non-replenishing NNRs. It is the case, however, that despite our possibly justifiable naivete during our meteoric ascent to industrial exceptionalism, and despite the fact that our predicament is undoubtedly an unintended consequence of our understandable efforts to continuously improve our species' prosperity, neither our NNR utilization behavior nor our industrialized way of life is sustainable. Exceptional though we are, we remain subject to nature's laws, and we will suffer the consequences associated with their violation. Accordingly, the real inconvenient truth is that there is no solution to our geologically based predicament, that is, a scenario that will culminate in a favorable outcome for humankind. There is only a resolution, and the resolution is a catastrophic transition to sustainability. So what can we do? Become aware of our predicament and its consequences. Understand how our industrial existence is enabled and why it is self-terminating. Then, armed with this knowledge, try to devise a less catastrophic resolution to our predicament than the one I envision. If we Homo sapiens are truly an exceptional species, now is the time to prove it. Humanity's fate was sealed during the 18th century with the advent of our Industrial Revolution. The NNR genie was released from the bottle and could not be put back. We remained ignorant of our inevitable fate during the 19th and 20th centuries by misconstruing our windfall of temporary NNR abundance as permanent NNR sufficiency. We must now pay the price for our ignorance. We will soon discover that we are not exemptional, having somehow transcended the laws of nature that apply to all lesser species, but that we are merely the extraordinarily fortunate beneficiaries of a one-time, rapidly depleting natural legacy, and that we are the unwitting and unfortunate victims of our own ingenuity. And we will soon discover that humanity's self-terminating experiment with industrialism represents a mere 300-year blip along the 3 million-year timeline of human history. If the ideas presented in this video sound inconceivable, please read BLIP and then decide. Thank you.